Another governor just declared war on your constitutional rights, and this time they're not even pretending to hide it. Tim Walz is pushing through a special legislative session with one goal: strip 6 million Minnesota residents of their Second Amendment protections in just 6 days. This isn't a proposal or a debate. It's already in motion, starting October 6th, and the clock is ticking. If you care about your rights, hit that subscribe button right now, because what I'm about to show you will make your blood boil, and you need to know exactly what's coming next. The constitutional blind spot. Minnesota stands alone as one of only 6 states in America without explicit Second Amendment protections written into its state constitution. While 44 states have clear language guaranteeing the right to keep and bear arms at the state level, Minnesota residents rely entirely on federal protections. California, New York, and Illinois all have stronger state constitutional protections than Minnesota, which makes this situation even more dangerous. The state legislature has been blocking constitutional amendments for years, and now we see why. They wanted Minnesota defenseless at the state level, so federal challenges would be the only option, and those take years to resolve. During that time, millions of gun owners become instant criminals overnight. But here's what makes this even more calculated than you think. The timing of this session wasn't random, and the specific date they chose reveals their entire strategy. The 6-day BLITZ strategy. October 6th through October 12th gives them exactly 6 days to pass sweeping gun control before anyone can mount an effective resistance. This isn't incompetence, it's tactical. The legislative session is timed to coincide with the fall recess, when most citizens aren't paying attention to state politics. Even more revealing, the $20 million budget cap they set isn't about fiscal responsibility. That specific number keeps the legislation below the threshold that would trigger automatic public referendum requirements in Minnesota law. They set it at $20 million to avoid letting you have a say. The agreement signed by legislative leaders includes a clause that prohibits amendments unless all 5 leaders approve unanimously. The bills are pre-written, pre-negotiated, and the 6-day window is just political theater to claim they followed proper procedure. In practice, this means 0 amendments will pass, and your voice doesn't matter to them. But the real manipulation goes even deeper when you look at who's actually being targeted by these new laws. The ghost gun trap. Eliminating the so-called ghost gun loophole sounds reasonable until you understand what it actually criminalizes. Building your own firearm has been legal since 1791. Before the Constitution was even ratified, Minnesota's proposal will require serialization of every part, including springs, pins, and grip panels. This isn't about stopping criminals. Criminals don't file serial numbers or follow registration laws anyway. When you're required to serialize and register individual components, the state now has a complete inventory of every firearm part you own. If you have 3 lower receivers in your workshop, that's 3 separate registration events, 3 separate fees, and 3 separate opportunities for the state to deny your application. The compliance costs alone will price most people out of building firearms. A receiver that costs $40 will require $150 in serialization fees, background checks, and registration paperwork. But what they're doing with binary triggers is even more insidious than parts registration. The binary trigger precedent. A binary trigger fires 1 round when you pull the trigger and 1 round when you release it. It's not automatic. You still control every single shot with deliberate finger movement. So why ban it specifically? Because it sets the legal precedent that fire rate alone justifies prohibition, regardless of how that rate is achieved. This creates a slippery slope, where the government decides what rate of fire is acceptable for civilian use. The proposal doesn't define too fast anywhere in the legislation. That's intentional. It gives regulators the power to expand the definition later without new laws. Once binary triggers are illegal, they'll argue that any trigger modification that increases fire rate falls under the same ban. Your aftermarket trigger kit becomes a felony overnight. And the enforcement mechanism they're using makes compliance nearly impossible to prove. The enforcement nightmare. The legislation includes no grandfathering, no grace period, and no buyback program. If you own a binary trigger on October 12th, you're a felon on October 13th. How do you prove you no longer own something? There's no legal mechanism for proving a negative. If law enforcement suspects you owned a binary trigger before the ban, they can obtain a warrant based solely on past purchase records. This is guilt until proven innocent. The same enforcement structure applies to standard capacity magazines. If you purchased a 30-round magazine anytime in the past decade, that purchase record can be used against you after the ban. You'd need to provide proof of destruction or transfer, but the law doesn't specify what constitutes acceptable proof. None of this is defined, which means selective enforcement becomes the standard. Your gun store records, credit card statements, and online purchase history all become evidence of current illegal possession, unless you can prove otherwise. But the most dangerous part isn't the ban itself. It's what happens when you try to comply. The red flag expansion. Strengthening extreme risk protection orders means making it easier to file them, harder to challenge them, and longer before you can recover your firearms. The current Minnesota red flag law requires clear and convincing evidence of danger. The new proposal lowers that standard to preponderance of evidence, meaning 51% likelihood is enough to strip your rights. Once filed, you have 24 hours before a hearing you might not even know about. If you miss that hearing because you weren't properly notified, the order is granted automatically. Challenging the order requires hiring an attorney at your own expense, and the hearing standard is stacked against you. You must prove you're not dangerous, again, proving a negative. The proposal also includes funding for public outreach and education about red flag laws. The confiscation loophole. When your firearms are seized under a red flag order, they go to local law enforcement for storage. Sounds reasonable until you learn there's no storage requirement in the law. By the time you win your appeal, if you win, your firearms may be rusted, damaged, or mysteriously lost. The law includes no compensation for damaged property and no liability for law enforcement if your firearms are destroyed during storage. The proposal extends the maximum duration of a red flag order from 1 year to 3 years, with automatic renewals if petitioned. That means your $3,000 competition rifle could sit in a damp evidence room for 3 years while you fight to prove you're not dangerous. The assault weapons definition trap. The proposed assault weapons ban doesn't define assault weapons by function, it defines them by features. A semi-automatic rifle is banned if it has 2 or more prohibited features from a list. That list includes pistol grips, adjustable stocks, barrel shrouds, threaded barrels, and grenade launchers. This feature-based ban is deliberately designed to be confusing, so average gun owners don't know what's legal. A rifle with a pistol grip and adjustable stock is banned. The identical rifle with a fixed stock and no pistol grip is legal. Even more problematic, the ban includes no technical diagrams or clear illustrations of what constitutes a prohibited feature. The legislation leaves these determinations to law enforcement and regulators. You won't know if you're a felon until an officer makes a judgment call about whether your stock is adjustable enough or your grip is pistoly enough to qualify. This assault on your constitutional rights starts in less than 48 hours, and if Minnesota falls, your state is next on the list. Call your representatives right now at 651-296-2146 for the House and 651-296-0545 for the Senate. Tell them absolutely no gun control, no deals, no compromise. Share this with every gun owner you know because mainstream media won't cover this until it's too late. And by then, 6 million Americans will have lost their rights overnight. Subscribe and turn on notifications because I'll be tracking every single vote, every amendment, and every betrayal as this unfolds in real time. This is the fight of our generation, and we either win together or lose everything.